All right, so we left off talking about which of the endocrine glands? The pituitary? No. Yeah, we did. I'm sorry. Yeah, we left off with who, though? This is kind of like the review part of the class. Pituitary gland, right? Anterior, posterior. Which one of those does not make hormones? Posterior pituitary. It stores hormones made by who? The hypothalamus. What are those hormones? You people in the back, you can speak too. Feel free to yell out something at any time.
Antidiuretic.
Quiet, you people. Quiet. Wake up. Oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. So those are the two hormones. Do you know what they do for a living? No. Oxytocin induces labor by causing uterus to contract. What about antidiuretic hormone? Who's it going to affect? What's its target? The kidneys. And it's going to cause what to happen? Increased water reabsorption back into the circulatory system. So that's water retention. Yes? Good. All right, the next guy in the book is the thyroid gland. Now, who stimulates the thyroid gland? Which pituitary? So the hypothalamus releases what? TRH, which is what? TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. Releasing. Then anterior thyroid stimulating. Then once those hormones reach the thyroid gland, the thyroid, which is the target, so what kind of stimulation does the thyroid get? Remember the three different types? Hormonal. So it is stimulated by other hormones secreted by other endocrine glands. Yes? Make sense? So where is it located? Go. Thyroid, not thymus. Not esophagus. Kind of in that same region. Larynx. Inks. Yeah, but there's a pharynx and a larynx and all sorts of other inxes. So it's the larynx. The larynx is cartilage in nature. The thyroid sits on top of that cartilage. Guess what they call the cartilage? Thyroid cartilage. When we talk about the respiratory system, we'll talk about that as well. And inside the larynx, it's a thick region in your neck. And does anybody know what lives inside the larynx? Your vocal folds or your vocal cords. Okay? So when we talk respiratory system, we're going to talk about this area again. But the thyroid is a group of glandular material that sits around that region in the neck. Now, pay close attention because next week you're going to have a histology extravaganza in lab. And guess what one of the endocrine glands is that you're going to look at? The thyroid. Now, we have follicles or spaces in the thyroid where the thyroid is going to store the product it makes. And what does the thyroid make? What are the hormones that the thyroid makes? Calcitonin, thyroglobulin, T3, T4. Those are the thyroid hormones, okay? T4 is what? Thyroxine. Wake up! It's too hot in here today. Everybody's going out. And what's T3? Big honking name. That's why it's T3, triiodothyronine. Okay, so these are the thyroid hormones. And the making of thyroid hormones could possibly be another essay question on your next exam. Hint, hint. There's also glands that might be swollen, lymph. So it has nothing to do with it. They will feel that the thyroid, they'll palpate the thyroid as well during a physical exam, but there's glands under here that would become inflamed if they were infected. Okay, so the synthesis of thyroid hormones could also be a possible essay question on your exam. The thyroid and the hormones it makes takes a little bit of time to make because I need several different pieces to create my thyroid hormones. So it's not a quick produce and quick release. So because of that, the thyroid is designed so that the cells, these guys called the parafollicular cells around the what? Around the follicle, are going to produce their hormones and then store them in here, the follicle. When it's time for me to release those hormones, I'm going to take from the soup, that's what I call it, the thyroid hormone soup, and release it into the circulatory system. So I have sort of a backup for when I need them, because it takes me a long time to make it. So this wonderful diagram on page 610 in your textbook are the wonderful steps to the production of thyroid hormones. Now, in order to make the thyroid hormones, I need a couple of different ingredients. And with the help of the Golgi Apparatus, what does the Golgi Apparatus do for a living? Package and ship, yes? In this case, it's going to help package things that I alter in the endoplasmic reticulum. Yeah, so you had to remember this stuff from last semester, believe it or not. But so we're going to take in some ingredients and produce portions of the thyroglobulin in the endoplasmic reticulum. And then the Golgi apparatus is going to take that and ship it to the colloid, that soup region in the thyroid gland. And the thing that's going to come in is something called tyrosines. They're a portion of the thyroid hormones. So they're one part. I need tyrosines. They're different lengths because T3 and T4 are different sizes. So we see the forming of something called DIT and MIT. And those are basically different lengths or different portions that are important to put into the colloid for the formation of the thyroid hormones. MIT, big huge name, or T1, and DIT, big huge name, or T2. The other very important ingredient I need to make my thyroid hormones, anybody know? Iodine. But I have to change it a little bit before it gets into the soup. So I trap, and that's part 2, iodide from the circulatory system. Where do you get iodide or iodine from? Can you make it? Nope. You gotta eat it. Where do you get most of yours in this country? Salt. Because a lot of the foods that we eat are very low in iodine, typically in this country. So because of that, we realized many people in the country were deficient in iodine. So we started adding it to something we know we were going to get into their diets, salt. So when you go to the supermarket now you can buy different kinds of salt, right? But it says iodized salt. Different foods, certain fishes that we tend not to eat. The dark-skinned fishes tend to be higher in iodine content as well, that we tend not to eat. That's the other thing we're sort of deficient in this country because of that is omegas. One of our essential fatty acids, omega-3 fatty acid. Does that ring a bell? That's coming into light in nutritional science a little bit more these days because so many of us have deficiencies in that. So iodine, very important ingredient. We're going to suck that in through what? Cells suck things in through what? A straw? Endocytosis. And we're going to ship it to the soup or colloid. So now we have both portions of the ingredients to make my T3 and T4. We have our tyrosines, DIT and MIT, and we have iodine, which we have switched from iodide to iodine so we can use it in the soup. Everybody with me? Okay. Now in the soup, and we have this little tradition at our house, so I use this as an example. We know the Super Bowl is coming up. Yes? And we know who's in it. And we know who's going to win. All right, so as we're watching the Patriots kill the Giants Super Bowl, we have this little tradition at my house, and we make the big sandwich. Yes? The big sandwich. So we have a big sandwich, but that's not just for one person, right? When it's time to eat the big sandwich, what do we do to it? We slice off pieces of the big sandwich and pass it out. Well, that's kind of what's happening in the colloid. We're going to make a molecule that is much larger than T3 or T4. And we're going to store that inside the colloid. When it's time to release these hormones, who stimulates me? Who stimulates me to release my hormones? The pituitary gland, anterior pituitary gland, thyroid stimulating hormone. It's time for me to release my hormones. So now I'm going to cut into the big sandwich. So how I do that is I engulf a bunch of two big molecules, T7s, T8s is what we call those guys, and I put them into a package and I fuse them with some chemicals. It's sort of like the knife I use to cut my big Super Bowl sandwich. In my finger. We won't talk about that. So lysosomes containing lysine chemicals will fuse with the big sandwich or larger thyroid molecule, and as it travels through the cell for exocytosis, it's going to cut it up into its proper portions. So now instead of a big T7 and T8, what am I going to throw out into the circulatory system? T3 and T4. Yes? Does that make sense? So I make big ones here. What are the ingredients I need to make my Super Bowl sandwich or my thyroid molecules? I need tyrosines and iodine. I make big molecules, and when it's time for me to use them, I'm going to ship them out, cut them up, so that they're right size when they hit the circulatory system. So that, my friends, are the steps to the synthesis of thyroid hormones. We good? All right. So what do thyroid hormones do for a living? And that's a wonderful, again, use the tables in this chapter. The tables are your friends. Because this is going to help get all the information small for you. So many of the thyroid hormone effects are related to what we call metabolic rate. What is metabolic rate? The rate at which metabolism takes place. So that's a fancy way of saying how fast all your chemistry is going to happen. One of the major reactions of metabolism, which we're going to talk about in this semester, when we talk about digestion, is cellular respiration. And what does that do? Anybody know what that reaction? You should from who's had biology, or it should ring a bell somehow. That was years ago, many years ago. Cellular respiration. Sounds like breathing, doesn't it? Well, one of the important ingredients to cellular respiration is oxygen. This is where, through a series of reactions, I'm going to break glucose down and make ATP. So, the other very important thing thyroid hormones are for are carbohydrate, lipid, protein metabolism. Those are the three things I mainly use to make what? ATP. Yes? Carbohydrates is the one I like best. I can make the most ATP from that, but I can also use lipids and proteins. So see, we're still talking about the same thing. Also has control over the nervous system, helps to promote development of the nervous system in the fetus and in infants. So when I don't have enough of these hormones, I can have problems or side effects. So look those over too. You should have a basic idea of some of the side effects of hyper, too much, or hypo, not enough secretion of these hormones. And then we're also going to have some effect on the cardiovascular system, the muscular system, the skeletal system, the gastrointestinal system, the reproductive system, and the integumentary system. So are thyroid hormones important? Yes. Yes, they are. The other thing that, and this, before we get too far, there's two different disorders which we'll describe in the book as well. Enlarged thyroid or goiter, because of what? Anybody know what a goiter is? Iodine deficiencies. And something called Graves' disease. Anybody know what that is? Who? Hyper, too much thyroid hormone secretion. Okay? The other thing that's produced by the thyroid is something called calcitonin. Now, remember we talked about parathyroid hormone? What did it help me do? Had something to do with calcium, didn't it? It stimulated osteoclasts. Very good. And what did that do for me? Help break down bone matrix and increase calcium levels. Very good. So parathyroid hormone is going to be secreted when what? When calcium levels are low. Well, calcitonin is kind of the opposite. And most of what happens is we actually inhibit parathyroid hormone when calcium levels are in the other direction. When calcium levels in the other direction, which is what? When they're high, after I go to Friendly's and eat the entire sundae I spoke of last class, which is still on my mind, by the way.
Because Friendly's closed.
It's closed? Get out. I'll have to go to Cold Stone Creamery instead. Ooh, what a shame. So I eat mega amounts of calcium and whatever, you know, that delicious sundae. What do I do with it? Yeah, I don't need any more in my circulatory system. Levels, homeostatic imbalance is going in the other direction. What do I have to do with it? I have to store it. Who's going to help me store calcium in my bone matrix? Calcitonin helps. Yep. And what cells? Who secretes osteocytes are bone maintaining cells. Who's the guys that are going to secrete the bone matrix? Osteoblasts. Okay, so they're going to work in conjunction with the decrease in parathyroid hormone or calcitonin, and they're going to bring calcium levels down. So parathyroid up, calcitonin down. Yes? So we already talked about the parathyroid gland, which is kind of dotted throughout the thyroid itself. Look at the difference between, and again, pay close attention because you're going to have to look at this in lab to your histology. The cells of the parathyroid gland are very closely packed together. When you get your slide, you're going to get a slide that has both thyroid and parathyroid on it. Look at the cells of the thyroid gland. Very different, right? But they're both going to be on the same slide. You should be able to distinguish the difference between the two. Okay? So that's the parathyroid gland. So parathyroid hormones discussed there. Release parathyroid hormone, stimulate osteoclasts. And remember, an osteoclast used to be a what? And I don't think it's in your book, but I'm giving you information from my brain. It used to be a monocyte. In the presence of parathyroid hormone, it's going to squeeze out of the circulatory system and become an osteoclast. So hypocalcemia, lower calcium levels in the blood, what kind of stimulation is this? What stimulates the release of parathyroid hormone? Yeah, what is that called? Is it? There's 3 different kinds. Low calcium in blood. Who? I'm not hearing it. Is it neuronal? Is it from the nervous system stimulation of release of parathyroid hormone? No. I'm narrowing it down for you. It's not hormonal, it's... What's the third one? Humoral. Remember humors we said is blood? So when certain levels go down or up in blood, that's going to cause the release. That's humoral. Yes? Good. Who's next? The adrenals. Now, different parts to the adrenals. We have the adrenal medulla and the adrenal cortex. When you look at this, you're also going to have some kidney on there. We don't want to look at that. We want to look at the thing that's sitting on top of the kidney. Okay? And that's this. That is the adrenal glands. Now there's different groups of cells in different areas in the adrenal gland. This is the structure of the adrenal gland on page 615. And it's the histology of the adrenal cortex. Cortex on the what? Just like the brain. Remember the brain? Cerebral cortex was what? On the outside, and the medulla oblongata, where is that? In the middle. The adrenal cortex is what we see, and there's different groups of cells in different areas called zona. So we have the zona glomerulosa, the zona fasciculata, and the zona reticularis. That's the outside, the cortex. And then what's in the middle? The adrenal medulla. Okay? The adrenals produce groups of hormones called mineralocorticoids. And these guys have a lot to do with osmoregulation. What's osmoregulation? Water balance. Why is that so important? I mean, big deal, I'm a little thirsty, who cares? Your cells are loaded with water. Outside your cells, water. And water pressure has a lot to do with movement of substances into and out of your cells. Substances like, watch this, ready? A lot of movement just went on. I brought in air from the atmosphere. The air came in to the ends of the tubes in my respiratory system into little sacs called alveoli. Those sacs are surrounded by capillaries, part of the circulatory system. And because of differences in pressure, the movement of oxygen from the atmosphere is going to happen, and it's going to go into my circulatory system. And because of differences in pressure, what's going to move out of the circulatory system and go into the respiratory system? Carbon dioxide. If I start messing with pressure gradients, and water balance can mess with pressure gradients, I'm going to mess with movement of molecules. Okay? So it's important that pressure in the system, and I'm talking about what pressure in your system? Blood pressure, stays constant, so that the movement of molecules can happen, not only from the atmosphere into blood through the respiratory system, but movement of molecules from in the renal system, circulating through your blood, having to be filtered out as urine or waste. You absorbing, did anybody eat lunch today? Hopefully you've eaten something today. What do you do with that stuff? You break it down, you absorb, yes? So there's tons of movement going on through the body, and these pressures are very important. So, Renin-Angiotensin Pathway, if you look at this diagram all the way over on your, where are you sitting, left, you'll see some of the hormones involved in helping to regulate water balance in the renal system. So some of the hormones, renin and angiotensin, when blood volume goes down, what do you think water, what happens with the whole water balance thing? If blood volume goes down, what is blood mostly? It's mostly water. So if I want to increase my blood volume, what's the quickest way for me to do it? Drink water, but retain water. Reabsorb more water back into the circulatory system. Your renal system, your kidneys, and the little filters we're going to talk about when we hit that chapter called nephrons are constantly filtering your blood. And one of the important things they do is either get rid of extra water or what? Hold on to, reabsorb back into the circulatory system water. Who's going to help those cells know what they need to do? Do I keep more water? Do I leave more water? I don't know what I'm doing. Who's going to tell me what to do? Hormones. So hormones like antidiuretic hormone are going to tell those cells to hold on to more water. When blood volume goes down, the renin and the angiotensin pathway are also going to help me do what? Reabsorb more water. When blood volume goes down, I need to increase my volume. The fastest way to increase my blood volume is to put more water in. Yes? Make sense? So, down here it says, increase absorption of sodium. Wait a minute. I thought she just said reabsorption of water. Didn't I? This is what it causes the cells to do. Reabsorb more sodium. Now we're going to go dust off some brain cells. Water is a polar molecule. Chemistry. Yeah, well, don't hate it that much. What does polar mean? It's got a slightly positive end and a slightly negative end. If I reabsorb more sodium, which is a what? A positive ion, guess who's going to follow? Negative stuff, or the negative end of my polar water molecule. Yes? It's called obligatory water reabsorption. So when I cause the cells to reabsorb more sodium, I also in turn cause them to reabsorb more water, because water follows that charged particle back into the circulatory system. And that in turn is going to do what? Look at the bottom of the chart. It's going to increase blood volume, and then because I increase volume, I'm going to increase pressure. Okay? Other factors like stress. None of you are under any stress, right? Can cause release of hormones too. If I increase blood pressure, what do I have to do? Let's think about the opposite scenario. If I increase pressure in the system, what's the fastest way for me to decrease pressure in the system? Get rid of more what? Water. There's a group of cells in the heart, and they're also mentioned in this chapter as well, that release a hormone called atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP. Now this group of cells are baroreceptors. What the heck is a baroreceptor? You learned that last semester. Anybody? Pressure. So, pressure starts to go up in the system. Again, I'm talking about the cardiovascular system. It goes up in the system, and who's going to feel that? Well, as blood goes rushing into the heart, we're going to feel that, aren't we? If the pressure goes up. And the group of cells that produce ANP will then release ANP, which have an inhibitory effect on what the Renin-Angiotensin Pathway did. And now what's going to happen? Instead of holding on to more water, what am I going to do? I'm going to release more water. And that's going to help bring pressure back in the system. Yes? So, it talks about several different mechanisms of some of these mineralocorticoids released by the adrenals. On page 615, talks a little bit about the renin-angiotensin mechanism. Basic understanding right now, yes? When you think renin-angiotensin, what's the first thing that's going to come to your head? Two words. Water reabsorption. That's what you're going to think. Yes? And hopefully you'll remember who does that for a living. ACTH. What's that? Any clue? It's called Adrenocorticotropic Hormone. And this is also part of the renin-angiotensin mechanism. We're going to talk about this in more detail when we hit the renal system. So don't panic. Okay? You panicking? And AMP, atrial natriuretic peptide. If they throw it in there, it's not released by who? Who are we talking about right now? The adrenals? Who makes it? Heart. Another group of hormones are the glucocorticoids. So this is a nice chart because it breaks down mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, and gonatocorticoids. That's another group of hormones that these guys produce. What do you think those hormones affect? The reproductive organs. Okay? And then the adrenal medulla hormones are called catecholamines. And they're going to have effects on the nervous system and nervous system function. Their target is the sympathetic nervous system. What's the sympathetic nervous system? That fight or flight thing we talked about last semester, what does sympathetic do? Speeds up reactions. So that's what those guys do for a living. Another one, actually before I get too far from the glucocorticoids, they do talk a little bit about something called Cushing's syndrome. And Cushing's syndrome, what are you going to have problems with? No, we're not in the thyroid. We're in the adrenals. Look in your book on page 617, 618. ACTH, adrenocorticotropic imbalances. From the adrenal cortex. And this patient here has a very characteristic physical indication that they might have some problems with their adrenal hormones. They call it a hump or buffalo hump, but it's sort of like a little fat pad that they produce on the back of their lower portion of their neck. What else can cause those wonderful adrenal gland hormones to be released? Stress. Is stress bad for you? Yes. And stress management has become big business in our country, hasn't it? It's very important not to get stressed out. When I start releasing too much of this hormone, think sympathetic response. It's going to have an effect on our heart rate, which in turn has an effect on our blood pressure. Remember, we mess with pressure in the system, we mess with exchange, not good. Also, think of the hose in your yard. What happens to it when you apply too much pressure? And you might have done this. I did this once when the hose was on. I oopsie ran over it with a car and actually parked on it on the end where the water was coming out. What happened to my hose? It blew up. Yes, my husband was so happy. But that's what happens to your tubes, like hose at my house, when the pressure builds up too much. Over time, it's going to wear away those tubes, your arteries and veins, and cause weak spots. So high pressure in the system is not good. It's also going to have the liver, or help the liver convert glycogen to glucose and release glucose into the blood. And what are you going to do with all that extra glucose? Store it for a rainy day. That's right. It's going to mess with your breathing tubes or bronchioles and the respiratory system. You see the list? Do I need to keep reading it? Stress is bad. And again, it's because of overstimulation of those hormones. So prolonged stress, long-term stress, can cause all sorts of problems, messing with your glucose levels, and eventually might even lead to what? Diabetes, type 2 diabetes. Your immune system has a hard time doing its job, so you might get sick all the time. Increased blood volume, increased blood pressure, and all the wonderful things associated with that. And then proteins and fats converted to glucose. Do I want to convert my proteins to glucose for energy? No. What are my proteins for? Building me and making very important proteins to help keep me safe, like antibodies, which we'll talk about this semester as well. So you see why the immune system might be affected as well? If I start breaking down these proteins that I'm making to serve other purposes so that I can convert them to glucose, I'm going to start messing with reactions of metabolism. Enzymes are also protein in nature. Okay? So that's the adrenals, the adrenal cortex, the adrenal medulla, and the hormones produced and what they do for a living. This isn't the, no, this is the pancreas. The next in line in your textbook, also, what's hyperglycemia? Anything hyper, think too much. Too much glucose. So elevated blood glucose levels. They give a little blurb on that as well. And again, we can see how the adrenal hormones can eventually lead to hyperglycemia. What's the pineal gland? What's that doing for me? I think yours are all very active today. It reduces a hormone called melatonin. And what does melatonin do for you? Makes you sleepy. Why is it important to sleep? And we've already talked several different things already, especially in special senses. I have to make those wonderful chemicals that I have to stick in those little bags in my cones and rods in my retina, stuff like that. So sleep is very important. It's controlled by, when do you tend to get more sleepy normally? What goes away? The sun. Of course, the teenagers, you kind of are on a whole different clock, and young adults. So, yeah, you seem to go the other way for a few years, and then you pop back into reality.
Because in college you need to stay up late and study.
You need to stay up late and study, theoretically. Yeah. So, pineal gland. And that is going to help produce that hormone melatonin, and it's going to help sort of set our metabolism clock. Other endocrine glands and tissues. First, we start with the pancreas. The pancreas we're going to talk about now, and when else are we going to talk about the pancreas? Digestive system. Pancreas is a very busy little organ. It's an exocrine and an endocrine gland. And when we talk about its endocrine function, we're going to talk about two groups of cells that we find in the pancreas. When you look at your slide, you're not going to have two different lovely colors. But can you see the difference in density? This one's a little bit too big. But you can actually see little areas, round little circular areas when you look at your histology slide of the pancreas, called the Islets of Langerhans. Must have been Germans who discovered that one. Yes? And within the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas, we're going to find two groups of cells that are very important in this chapter. One is called the alpha cells, and they produce a hormone called glucagon. The other is the beta cells, and that's what that weird looking B is, a beta. And they are going to produce what? Insulin. These two guys are going to work together to help balance what? Your glucose levels or your blood sugar. Remember, blood glucose is measured where? Blood what? Plasma. So the liquid portion. So what kind of stimulus do these cells get to secrete their product? Humoral. Very good. So when blood glucose levels start to go down, what do I need to do? And this is another way to study this chapter. Think about what happens when it goes too low or it goes too high. What do I physically need to do? Or I have to do what? What if I don't have anything to eat? Like many of you who skip your breakfast in the morning. No, coffee does not count.
Yes, it does.
No. If you put sugar in it, it still doesn't count. You're going to use that up in a...
Is that why, like, when your blood sugar is really low, you crave sweet stuff? When your blood sugar is really low, you usually dizzy?
Yeah, you usually get dizzy.
That too, but so, like, when you're really, like...
It affects your nervous system because what do my wonderful little nervous system cells need to have? A constant supply of glucose. So when blood glucose levels floating around in the plasma start to go down, I need to bring it where? Back up again. And who's going to help me do that? Glucagon. Way back when, again, dust off those brain cells, when we were talking about molecules back in the chemistry chapter that you all loved so much, we talked about complex carbohydrates. Do you remember the one we talked about, glycogen?
Yeah.
Okay. That's my stored form of what? Glucose. That's the easy access stuff. So glucagon, when released into the circulatory system, is going to help elicit the breakdown of glycogen into what? Glucose. So that I can do what?
You can survive.
Release it into the circulatory system and increase my delivery of blood glucose to all my wonderful little tissues. Where do I store glycogen? Most of it gets stored in the liver, but I also store some someplace else. In your muscles. Once I've gone back to that homeostasis level, I'm good, so I have an equal balance. But what happens when I eat that same, no more friendlies, okay, Cold Stone Creamery, I'll settle for that. I go eat my sundae. I digest it, it gets into my circulatory system. Lots and lots of what's going to get in there? Glucose. Now, what do I have to do now? Now I have to get the glucose somewhere else. Too high a glucose level is not good for my body. I have to cause the body to take it and use it where it needs to be used. Which is where? Inside my cells. Not floating around in my blood plasma. I need to get it into my cells. And remember when we talked about water-soluble hormones in the second messenger system? We talked about what insulin did, right? So when I release insulin from the pancreas, and what cells are going to do that? Beta cells in the islets of Langerhans. And who's going to cause the release of this? What kind of stimulation do the cells get to release? Humoral, very good. We're going to release from the pancreas into the circulatory system insulin. Insulin is going to help get glucose where? Into the cells. When insulin levels go up way too fast, it also does something else. Do you know? Yeah, it can cause low blood sugar in some cases of abnormal levels. But it also causes something else, another reaction to happen. Besides getting glucose into cells, it also takes all the excess from my Cold Stone Creamery delicious sundae and stores it for a rainy day. So it also, insulin not only brings down blood glucose levels by getting it into cells, but it also stimulates fat production. Too much, too fast. Has anybody ever heard of the Glycemic Index?
Yes.
That's another thing coming to light in nutritional science. And it has to do with how quick foods raise your blood glucose levels. Is it better to raise them really fast? No. It's better to raise them at a nice, slow, steady state so your body can do all the chemistry it needs to do and not suck all of that into your fat. So table sugar has a very what? High glycemic index versus whole grains and good stuff in the carbohydrate family that have a lower glycemic index. So that's what that's all about. So that's what insulin does for a living. Now remember, when I have things that are too high and too low in my body, our equalizing systems get taxed trying to take care of this. And the homeostatic imbalance with respect to glucose they talk about in your textbook, they talk about diabetes. Now what is that? Yeah, it depends on type 1 or 2. Do you know the difference?
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Type 1 is insulin-dependent, body doesn't make insulin. And then type 2 is your body makes insulin, but your cells are not being able to store it at blood sugar.
Exactly. So she said, and I repeat, type 1, my body has trouble making the hormone insulin. Either it makes it the wrong way. Is this genetic? Could be, yes. Sometimes. So, genetically I'm not making, or for some reason, I'm not making insulin the right shape. So it's not effective. So what do I have to do? I have to take a synthetic form of insulin that is the right shape so my cells will do what they need to do with the glucose. The other one, type 2 diabetes, has more to do with the receptors on the surface of the cell. Now sometimes as we get older, we start making those receptors, which are proteins in nature, we start making them the wrong shape. So even though we produce insulin, the receptors aren't able to receive that insulin because they're the wrong shape. And we have problems dealing with glucose. All that excess glucose that doesn't get into the cells where it's supposed to be can cause problems with other systems, like the liver, who's going to try and equalize all that stuff. Fat production, which is related to increased levels of glucose. Trying to break down these products, we might produce waste products called ketone bodies. And one of the things that, is anybody diabetic or know a diabetic? You do the little blood test thing. But what else? They give you these little sticks. Yeah, you have to pee on the stick. Because one of the things you're going to see dumping out into your urine is excess of these ketone bodies because of the way fat is being metabolized because your glucose is too high. And the other thing I'll see in my urine, which I'm not supposed to see, is glucose. Right? Glucose, I want to reabsorb all that, I want it. But if I have way too much in my body, my kidneys can't keep up. So we're going to end up spilling glucose into the urine. So that's what they talk about under homeostatic imbalances.
When you have diabetes, they talk about like one developing into other. Is it one going into two or two going into
No, you don't develop into another. They're sort of two separate, and you might have to take insulin because of type 2 diabetes and the severity of insulin intake and use in the cells. So type 2 diabetes, again, usually cellular related and cellular receptor related, but it might get to the point if it progresses that you'll have to take insulin to control your blood glucose. So that might be what you're...
type 2 would be one that children most have?
There's juvenile diabetes, and again, there could be two different reasons for that as well. Is everybody with me? Okay. So, that is the pancreas. There's other members of your body that make hormones as well. Gonads, which we talked about before. Adipose tissue makes hormones called leptins. In the GI tract, gastrointestinal tract, when we talk about digestion, we're going to talk about a bunch of different chemicals that help in the digestive process. So this is in the stomach. Gastrin's produced in the duodenum, which is part of your small intestine. Intestinal gastrin is produced. Secretin is produced. And another one called cholecystokinin, CCK, is produced. Again, we'll get much more specific with these guys when we talk about the digestive system. But I do want you to be able to recognize that these hormones are produced by the digestive system. Yes? Okay. Who else? The heart, we already talked about that guy. Atrial natriuretic peptide. The kidneys, not the adrenals, the kidneys. See the difference? Yes? The kidneys, and we're going to talk about this fella next chapter, make a hormone that's going to help stimulate red blood cell production. It's called erythropoietin. And remember that whole Renin-Angiotensin pathway? You probably asked yourself, who made the renin part of the whole Renin-Angiotensin pathway? I knew you were asking yourself that question. It's the kidneys. Skeleton makes hormones that are going to help increase insulin production and insulin sensitivity. Your skin makes hormones that are sort of precursors to who? Vitamin D. So when they say vitamin D is the sunshine vitamin, you've heard that, right? Because sun helps to stimulate, what's that called? Cholecalciferol, which is a provitamin or precursor to vitamin D3. Why is vitamin D important? It helps with calcium absorption. You can't absorb calcium properly without the help of vitamin D.
Is it like the key almost to unlock it in a sense?
No, it's think chemistry, and you have to have the building blocks for a reaction. It's the precursor molecule to the reaction that produces the vitamin D. Gonads. I think I have, wait a minute. Oh, I forgot the thymus. We're going to talk about the thymus when we talk about, anybody know? What system? Thymus? The immune system. The thymus produces hormones that are going to help teach your T cells how to recognize self-antigens. So hormones like thymulin, thymopoietin, and thymosin are all involved in T lymphocyte development and in immune responses. And again, when we hit the immune system and we talk about the role of T cells and what they do for a living and how they do it, you're going to hear me mention this guy again. The gonads produce hormones. And what do you think the hormones? There's not a chart for this, but it's on page 623 in your textbook. The gonads and the placenta are going to help produce hormones to help mature and stimulate the release of what? Reproductive cells. Remember, they need a chemical cue to do what? To start what? We talked about this last class. They have to undergo a certain, a little bit different cell division thing. Meiosis. Which will end up with cells that have half the genetic material, 23 chromosomes, instead of the whole genetic material, 46 chromosomes of somatic cells. So some of these hormones produced by the gonads are going to help to mature the cells and ensure proper release of the cells and help keep cycles going. So when we talk about the reproductive cycle and then we talk about pregnancy and development, we'll revisit some of these guys again. Who's left? Developmental aspects, skin, kidneys, adipose, skeleton, da-da-da-da-da. We are done with chapter 16! So,